The galaxy was enormous, brimming with life and rife with strife throughout power battles between civilizations fought for supremacy or survival in innumerable solar systems. One group in particular, the extraterrestrial mercenaries, stood out in the chaotic stage. Because they were unbound by any specific group or ideology, they battled for just financial gain, and their reputation was legendary in front of them, and planet defenses easily collapsed. Nobody dared to fight them since their wins were so definite that rumors of their invincibility spread like wildfire, because doing so would undoubtedly result in destruction, because the extraterrestrial mercenaries were more than just warriors. They were a force of nature. Each member's character was shaped in the crucible of innumerable conflicts and tempered by their unwavering quest for victory. Their combat machines combined ancient wisdom with formidable engineering. The most feared warriors in the world were generations, because of their unwavering thirst for power, precision, and brutality. No universe, but despite their great power and skill, they had little idea how to vanquish that. Their lack of failure had instilled in them a sense of conceit and the conviction that no adversary could ever equal their power. Earth's Marine Rangers were unique in that their activities were rarely visible due to the peculiar capabilities of the Battlefront's galaxy. They scoured the galaxy for adversaries without fear, focusing on their efforts largely on their few people. Capabilities where the Marines' superior firepower and raw muscle were used by the alien mercenaries. Functioned with discipline, flexibility, and precision, in contrast to the mercenaries who Marines fought for their own lives, not for fame or fortune. Species, their beliefs, and their lifestyle, this disparity in drive created. They were unpredictable, a trait that the extraterrestrial mercenaries were unable to understand or foresee. When the first rumors of a new force the mercenaries rejected, the force that was developing in the galaxy as irrelevant rumors they had heard about, reports of swift and decisive action were made by a tiny squad of human troops who moved with unwavering precision, leaving no trace. The mercenary leaders were informed of successes on far-off conflicts, but they were dismissed. How could a species, Earth, was considered a backwater and an afterthought, and humans are a threat to the Mercenaries' dominion? Planet with nothing to offer. And they had complete contempt for humanity. They didn't see any reason to change their minds, but the Marine Rangers were not your typical warriors. Their rigorous training was intended to eliminate any weaknesses, and they developed resilience by perfecting their bodies and minds. In addition to conventional warfare, they also learned to think like, with that means some develop. The Marines' strategy, ingenuity, and unwavering dedication to their goal are more important than their numbers or superior firepower. Realized that mental toughness alone was not enough to win wars, Earth became entangled in the galaxy's resources, and strategic battles as they intensified, position made it a desirable target for the extraterrestrial mercenaries, who were constantly searching for fresh conquests. Shifted their focus to humanity, seeing an opportunity to establish their supremacy if they achieved an easy victory. However, humanity was not alone in confronting this menace. The Marine Rangers were asked to protect their house, and they immediately responded that the mercenaries were a challenge that needed to be overcome. They weren't invincible. The scene was set for a clash that would change. On one side of the galaxy, the extraterrestrial mercenaries stood fully assured in their ability to defeat any opponent. The Marine Rangers were committed to demonstrating that humanity was not to be undervalued. One relied on hubris for survival, while the other relied on discipline for profit. The upcoming conflict would put their abilities and identities to the test, according to the extraterrestrial mercenaries. The approaching battle, with their customary assurance, they readied their fleets and honed their weapons in anticipation of show off their supremacy once more. But as rumors of the Marines' unusual actions began to circulate, a sense they heard of ambushes that left no survivors, of tactics so exact that a sense of uneasiness started to seep into their ranks. For the first time in generations, the alien warriors, even the most experienced mercenaries, were unable to defeat them. began to doubt their invincibility. This was a sentiment they did not accept or comprehend. In the meantime, the Marine Rangers trained internally. They didn't brag about their skills or look for any satisfaction. Each ranger understood his role, and their focus and resolve were unwavering. And everyone had complete faith in their fellow soldiers. This unity, which was created through shared desires, despite their struggles and unrelenting determination, they did not consider themselves to be heroes or saviors. Their humility was evident in the fact that they were merely soldiers carrying out their duties to safeguard their people. In most cases, the two armies had little else to concede of, and provided them with an unquantifiable advantage. The galaxy observed as the two armies approached conflict. Many believed it was inevitable that the extraterrestrial, why would this time be any different, when mercenaries had already defeated every opponent they had encountered? However, those who had observed the Marines in action and were more aware of the accuracy of their blows and the resourcefulness of their strategies and the unshakable determination in their eyes, they were certain that the mercenaries were going to encounter a foe unlike any they had ever encountered. Had already come across the conflict between the extraterrestrial mercenaries and the Marines, more than a conflict between forces. The Marine Rangers represented a conflict between ideas. The Marine Rangers thought that dominance and fear were the keys to power, but the Marines understood that this was a test of what strength really meant. As the galaxy held its breath, unity, discipline, and the determination to defend what was most important were the sources of true strength. In addition to deciding Earth's fate, two forces poised to meet the outcome would send shockwaves across the universe, altering history. Indefinitely, the extraterrestrial mercenaries were assured that despite rumors of human soldiers, they had encountered innumerable enemies, and none had resisted their power. Functioning outside of their borders were disregarded since, to them, humans were a primitive species. Their conceit prevented them from seeing the importance of these early movements and made them unworthy of serious attention. The Marine Rangers did not approach war in the same manner as other galactic troops, which they were unable to understand. They prioritized accuracy, efficiency, and precision over grandiose shows of power and overwhelming numbers. The alien mercenaries took great satisfaction in their ambush tactics, taking advantage of the enemy's weaknesses. They had honed their strategy over generations of depending on overwhelming firepower, threats, and physical force to ensure victory. When they ultimately made the decision to interact with the Marine Rangers, they expected a simple victory. Their leaders planned according to the belief that people would fail under duress, as so many others had done in the past. Yet as the conflict progressed, the first indications of problems were when their early strategies failed to live up to their expectations. Failed. The mercenaries who were used to setting the conditions of the battle discovered that their moves were uncertain, and every move they took seemed to be predicted, and they outmaneuvered them. Their their supply lines were cut off with surgical precision before they could be ignited. What most perplexed them was that the Marine Rangers worked differently from the mercenaries. With no direct confrontation, never met, they struck quickly, and before a counterattack could be launched, they disappeared. Despite their best efforts, the Marines were left pursuing Shadow's panic, started to spread among their ranks, which was not the intended course of a conflict. They flourished on disorder, but the Marines brought about a different kind of anarchy that the Marines were unable to control. The mercenaries' deliberate disintegration of their forces, piece by piece. Their size made them slow, and they were always perceived as having strength, brute force, and sheer numbers working against them. Because they relied on erratic tactics, they were exposed, and the Marines took advantage of any lapse in defense. With brutal effectiveness, the mercenaries tried to adjust and used advanced electronics. The information that reconnaissance troops discovered while trying to learn more about this new threat only made them feel more uneasy. Humans were far more developed than they had thought, and their equipment was streamlined, effective, and multi-purpose. Instead of using brute force, their strategies were similar to anything the mercenaries had ever seen. Combining psychological warfare with precision strikes, they sow fear and uncertainty, driving the four species that the mercenaries had deemed inferior. The humans' actions made them question everything they did. As the days passed, the mercenaries discovered an unnerving degree of sophistication. They were responding to an unusual situation rather than controlling the Marines. Rangers refused to give it up, leaving the mercenaries increasingly divided after each battle. Unwavering confidence being undermined, this was not merely a physical conflict, but a psychologically. The Marines recognized the importance of preventing the opponent from preventing the opponent. Therefore, they stayed away from major conflicts and concentrated on lowering the mercenaries' morale. Despite their increasing numbers, mercenaries, who were not used to protracted periods of uncertainty, found it difficult to stay united. Despite their frustrations, the alien mercenaries' dignity prevented them from retreating. Permitting it, they told themselves that humans were just lucky and that victory was still possible. But deep down, doubts started to grow. The mercenaries had always thought they were better than others, yet they were unable to, pure beyond their skills. They brought a new perspective to the problem, found the Marine Rangers to be significantly more powerful than anyone had expected, kept their focus and realized that the mercenaries weren't unbeatable. However, they were also aware that overconfidence could be their undoing, so every choice they made was well thought out. Every action was planned, and they imposed their will rather than being influenced by the mercenaries' favored method of fighting. This discipline was a hallmark of the conditions of engagement, which made sure the mercenaries were always on the defense, a characteristic of the Minefeld, Marines that distinguished them from the disorganized and arrogant mercenaries. The alien mercenaries. Initially to observe trends in the Marines' behavior, but it was already too late when they did. Capitalizing on the Marines' flexibility allowed them to stay ahead of the game, for the Marines had already advanced to the next stage of their strategy after the mercenaries developed every countermeasure. The mercenaries were unable to establish any kind of authority due to their constant mobility. As the conflict progressed, their ranks' obvious displeasure led to errors and misunderstandings. As the mercenaries' coherent structure deteriorated, its commanders started to fall apart, argued about the best course of action, with some calling for a complete retreat and others calling for a full-scale attack. Marines took advantage of this discord to target important individuals and further undermine the mercenaries' line of command. The Marines realized that the quickest route to win was via necessity, not malice, which is how strategy was established. The Marines' own shortcomings by using the mercenaries' conceit against them destroyed their armies without ever fighting a conventional conflict, which the extraterrestrial mercenaries had previously dreaded throughout the galaxy, was up against a foe they couldn't comprehend or beat, despite their prior triumphs been accomplished by overwhelming force. But that strategy was eliminated by the Marines. The mercenaries had traditionally felt that their most effective weapon was fear, but in this battle, they were the ones who began to fear that everything was challenged by the Marine Rangers' precision discipline and tremendous ingenuity. Mercenaries believed they understood warfare, but in the end, their pride proved to be their downfall. Assumed that humanity's absence from the galaxy meant that the Marine Rangers were weak, therefore, they undervalued their opponent, dispelled that myth, demonstrating that strategy and resolve, rather than bulk or firepower, were the true measures of strength. The Marines' unwavering resolve was greater than the mercenaries' combined strength, and this insight would make a lasting impression on the entire galaxy, not just the mercenaries. Was a lesson in humility that the mercenaries would remember as the aliens ended up in a feeble position. Their confidence had been shattered by the situation they had never encountered before, and their typical tactics were not working for. When they first began to doubt not only their skills, but also their comprehension of warfare in general, They had always thought that the secret to victory was superior numbers and overwhelming firepower, but the Marine Rangers were unsuccessful. Showing otherwise, this insight caused their ranks to become confused and afraid. Their attempts to reorganize and adjust to feelings they weren't used to handling were not very successful. Despite their experience, Mercenaries' inflexible methods and reliance on time trial strategies rendered them indecisive. Mercenary leaders were predictable, and the Marines took advantage of this at every opportunity. Convened emergency councils to discuss the best way to combat this unexpected threat. While some advocated for brute force to focus more on their strengths, others urged caution in light of the Marines. The Marines' internal conflicts only make their situation worse by giving them the potential to turn their hostility against them. Rangers, on the other hand, worked with steady focus since they knew that every move was meticulously planned to keep the Mercenaries off balance, since momentum is crucial. Strategy was about subverting the enemy's will, not merely about winning individual battles. The Mercenaries had never experienced the psychological side of combat on the same level as the Marines. The capacity to predict their movements generated an air of certain doom, as if loss were unavoidable. However, it is undeniable that the pivotal moment occurred when the Mercenaries tried a massive attack to retake the battlefield, committing all of their resources to a single, powerful attack in the hopes of overpowering the Marines with brute force. But the Marines were expecting this. In response, they set up traps, cut off supplies, and took advantage of the terrain. By the time the Mercenaries realized their mistake, their forces had already dispersed. Thin, and their unity was severely harmed. This failure signaled the start of a significant change within the Winmare set. When mercenary ranks realized their standard tactics were failing, they were forced to face uncomfortable truths. They had established their reputation on fear and strength, but neither was working against the Marines. Although their leaders found it difficult to adjust, the psychological cost was already too high. While the Marines continued to fight, concerns about their invincibility spread like a virus, eroding trust and morale. Exploit their advantage. They continued to be deliberate and diligent, not letting up even when the Mercenaries faltered. Their momentum was strengthened by every victory, no matter how minor, and they realized that war was as much regarding perception as it was about actual battle. By staying focused and consistency, they made it apparent that the Mercenaries had lost control. The Mercenaries made an effort to regroup again, but this time they were more cautious and tried to separate smaller. Marine units attempted to take advantage of coordination flaws, but all efforts were successful. Despite defeat, the Marines' unmatched teamwork and communication allowed the Mercenaries to finally manage to win the battle against the larger forces of the combatants. In order to adjust to any circumstance with this degree of unity, they were able to recreate their reliance on individual strength and hierarchical command systems. It is this degree of flexible tactics, as the battle focuses on the disparities between the two units, became more obvious that the Marines were proactive and the Mercenaries were proactive. While the Marines used intimidation, the Mercenaries used the basic shortcomings in the Mercenaries' strategy, which they had always regarded as warfare, were brought to light by these disparities as a struggle for supremacy, while the Marines viewed it as a challenging conundrum that called for both intelligence and force of will. Nevertheless, the alien Mercenaries encountered yet another major obstacle: their incapacity to engender trust among their own ranks. Their dependence on terror as a driving force started to backfire as casualties increased, with several Mercenaries deserting, hesitant to confront their masters, and others beginning to doubt them. Others became furious of an opponent they could not comprehend and blamed their commanders for the growing failures. This internal conflict made their already brittle unity much weaker. However, the Marines functioned as a cohesive unit because of their common understanding of an unbreakable relationship formed by purpose and mutual trust, which enabled them to work together with unmatched efficiency. Even in the most trying situations, they were motivated by something other than glory or self-interest, sprang from a more profound dedication to their purpose and to one another. And this disparity between the two forces turned into a distinguishing element in the battle. The leaders of the mercenaries understood that a significant shift was required, but they were out of possibilities. They lacked the flexibility, and their own constraints hindered their attempt to develop an ingenuity needed to thwart the Marines' techniques with every new method they ever contemplated. It seemed as if the Marines could discern their plans ahead of time because they were swiftly and decisively countered. They were even put to death, and their sense of powerlessness made the mercenaries even less determined. The Marines' campaign agony allowed them to gain a degree of control never before attained by the mercenary, found themselves unable to restore control of the once feared warriors. On the battlefield, their sense of invincibility had been destroyed, along with their faith in the Marines' unwavering perpetuity. Every attempt to reorganize was met with strong resistance from the mercenaries, leaving little space for recovery. This turning point wasn't just about tactics or strategy. It was about their strength being simply outmatched. About attitude, the Marines' capacity to be composed, concentrated, and flexible under terrible discipline. They had demonstrated that strength alone was insufficient to win a war discipline, and pressure provided them an unbeatable advantage. The incapacity of the mercenaries to be inventive was just as crucial, if not more so. We were left to struggle with the alien mercenaries after failing to adjust to this new world. A force they had underestimated, the Marine Rangers had pushed the galaxy's horror to a low point. Not only outperformed them in combat, but had also destroyed the bases of their identity. The Marines had taken advantage of the mercenaries' greatest weakness, which was their sense of superiority. With disastrous consequences, this turning point signaled the start of the mercenaries' demise. As they came to accepting the extraterrestrial mercenaries as a reality they never imagined, once a representation of unwavering strength, started to disintegrate due to the Marines' constant pressure. Rangers' once unified forces were diminished, and their faith in their own invincibility had been destroyed to pieces of their former selves. Retreats increased in frequency, and their efforts to reassemble grew more. Desperate for a group whose reputation was based on power, the knowledge of their weakness was destroying their ranks, which had before been bound together by fear and conceit, were now divided by uncertainty and discord. The mercenaries' retrieval was chaotic and not well planned, as evidenced by their leaders' infighting and shifting of blame caused their lack of readiness for this type of hardship to become. Evidently, they had never considered the idea of losing, and now that they were considered the idea of losing, and now that they were confronted with that fact, they tried to keep things under control. This chaos gave the Marines a chance to press their benefit, taking advantage of the mercenaries' lack of structure, quickly and forcefully against strategic locations to severely weaken enemy forces as word of the Marines' triumph spreads. When word got out, the galaxy started to realize that the once feared extraterrestrial mercenaries were now seen as weak. Their aura of power ruined this change in opinion. Significant ramifications for other groups that the mercenaries had long persecuted, including chance to rebel against them, comrades started to uncooperatively withdraw. Once a unifying force, the mercenaries are now linked to a collapsing power. For the Marine Rangers, this meant that the power of dread was now isolated and exposed. Not a celebration. Instead, they stayed committed to their goal, realizing that the triumph was not motivated by a thirst for glory, and the war was far from ended. However, because they were dedicated to their cause, they viewed themselves as defenders rather than conquerors, and this viewpoint directed their self-control and modesty, contrasted sharply with the mercenaries' haughtiness in every action. Demonstrating the distinctions between the two forces, the Marines' triumph had ripple effects that went beyond the instant confrontation. Their deeds made it abundantly evident that the galaxy's power was. The Marines had shown that flexibility, strategy, and unity were no longer only evaluated by brute force. Other sides found this lesson to be just as, if not more significant. Many of them started to reconsider how they approached warfare. And the Marines had not only altered the course of a single conflict, but had also altered the alien mercenaries' perception of the galaxy's larger power dynamics. Their reputation, once their best, was severely damaged by the fallout from their losses. Asset has turned into a liability due to their incapacity to adjust and bounce back from setbacks, revealed serious shortcomings in their strategy. These faults, which had previously been concealed by their continuous winning streak, were now exposed for everyone to see. The mercenaries, once the pinnacle of authority, were in an identity crisis. As the confrontation drew nearer, the unfamiliar position became more and more unimportant and exposed. At the end, the mercenaries had to decide whether to keep fighting. It was difficult for them to decide whether to risk complete annihilation or to retreat and try to rebuild. Leaders disagreed, with some calling for a smart withdrawal and others for a last stand. Intense internal arguments that further revealed the divisions within their ranks, and in the end, their choice would. Regardless, the Marines persisted in their relentless advance, departing the invaders with little space for movement. The Marines' strategy was methodical, and they were strategic, recognized the need of keeping up the momentum, and refused to stop their operations. Motivated by rage or retaliation, but out of necessity, they aimed to make sure the mercenaries would never again pose a threat. The Marines were an unstoppable force because of their strategic brilliance and level of resolve. Despite their best efforts, the mercenaries failed to stage a successful counterattack. However, the mercenaries left a legacy of destruction beyond the worlds they had destroyed when they withdrew. However, their inability to adjust had cost them dearly, and their formerly unwavering confidence had supplicated by uncertainty for a group that had prospered on fear. This change was disastrous because they were now the hunted rather than the hunters, and they were sick of this role reversal. As the Marines finished their campaign, those prepared to manage the galaxy looked on. Using their victory to further establish themselves as a formidable force was not only a triumph for humanity, but also evidence of the strength of discipline, solidarity, and their capacity to adapt allowed them to defeat the galaxy's most feared warriors without using force. But their accomplishment, achieved through superior planning and steadfast resolve, earned them not only respect, but also a degree of respect for the Marine Rangers that is uncommon in the galaxy. At the end, they were aware that what they had done had established a precedent that would influence the galaxy for years to come, demonstrated that a combination of creativity and resourcefulness might defeat even the most powerful forces. Eventually, this lesson of humility for the mercenaries served as motivation for other Marines, demonstrated that strength was more about adapting and surviving than it was about dominating the foreign mercenaries after their untested capacity. Their incapacity to change had been their downfall, and their fear of the galaxy was now a warning. Their dependence on terror had left them unprepared for an unflappable foe, and their demise served as a reminder of the perils of conceit and complacency. The mercenaries had failed, and the galaxy had changed. To adapt to it, the mercenaries were compelled to face their new reality following their defeat. They were no longer the invincible warriors they once were. Their reputation was in ruins, and their might had been destroyed. For the Marine Rangers, who had previously just been a ghost of themselves, this was a proof of their strategy. They had not only protected their people, but also changed how the galaxy thought of what it meant to be strong, and their acts would have an effect on future generations as factions throughout the galaxy reassessed their own plans and objectives in light of the Marines' account. Rangers and the alien mercenaries were a contrast between strength and adaptability, as well as arrogance and humility. And the tale of power versus discipline would be recited for years to come, not only as one of triumph, but it served as a reminder of the Marines' responsibilities to safeguard and teach them the true meaning of power. Serve a purpose that they would keep up for the mercenaries. It was facing an epiphany that exposed the limitations of their strategy and the effects of their hubris. The alien mercenaries' defeat changed who they were and where they stood in the galaxy. Was previously thought to be unstoppable, but their defeat by the Marine Rangers destroyed that belief. Dominance, this change in thinking, rippled over star systems, destroying the fear-based authority. The mercenaries, whose reputation was in ruins after decades of use, faced in questioning their leadership style and position in a galaxy that no longer shuddered at their name due to an existential crisis. For ages, as dissatisfaction within their ranks increased, the mercenaries relied on a strict hierarchy in which superiors held unquestionable power and authority, and dissent was suppressed by intimidation, but their loss revealed serious weaknesses in those who adhered to this system, started to question their superiors, accusing them of being too arrogant and incapable of adapting to their own internal failure. As factions argued over whether to embrace reform or stick to their old methods, conflicts emerged. The mercenaries' once unassailable leadership found itself in a vulnerable position. Unable to bring their divided forces, this internal strife prevented them from taking decisive action, and some leaders advocated for instant retribution, thinking that another major conflict could rest and repair their reputation, which others pushed for withdrawal and a reconstruction phase, claiming that their troops were too weak to take any more chances. These arguments cost them a lot of time and money, making them open to outside threats. Their credibility was further damaged by their incapacity to put up a united front among their peers and among the Galactic Rangers. The Marine Rangers' victory also had wider ramifications for the galactic power and other galaxy forces. Balanced for many years, the mercenaries had dominated the field, using their might to forge alliances and claim territory. Nonetheless, their demise created a void that other groups hurried to fill, aimed to establish additional areas by taking advantage of the mercenaries' weakened state, while others concentrated on alliances aiming to stop any one party from gaining the same degree of unbridled dominance as the mercenaries previously. As factions negotiated the changing landscape, this realignment phase brought about both opportunities and tensions. Despite the mayhem they left behind, the extraterrestrial mercenaries still had the resources and expertise that rendered them hazardous, but they weren't completely vanquished. They were only somewhat. Those in their ranks realized this and started looking at fresh tactics to get back on track. To gain insight from the Marines' achievements by examining their strategies and highlighting the necessity of flexibility, they realized that using only brute force and terror was no longer an option. Feasible, but putting these reforms into practice was difficult, because many mercenaries opposed them. After achieving their goal, the Marine Rangers eschewed their conventional techniques and stayed out of the spotlight, went back to their routines, which were centered on preparation and vigilance. Instead of reveling in their accomplishments, had shown that flexibility and discipline, not brute force, were the sources of power. This strategy struck a chord with many. Observers encouraging other groups to reconsider their own tactics, the Marines' focus on unity and purpose established a new benchmark for the galaxy's organizational and military effectiveness, while the recruitment of new warlords saw the light at the end of the corridor. The alien mercenaries encountered a difficult path because of their incapacity to adjust to shifting circumstances. Their loss had been caused by circumstances, and any chance of their recovering their previous prominence depended on them conquering this weakness. In addition to material resources, the rebuilding process necessitated a fundamental change in perspective that they were further split into factions because many of its members were unwilling to accept this opposition to change, within groups thus undermining their unity. The mercenaries' defeat also acted as a warning. It brought to the attention of other influential groups in the galaxy the perils of complacency, and the repercussions of the Marine Rangers had exceeded expectations by using tactics and intelligence to undervalue an opponent. This lesson, which demonstrated that no force, no matter how powerful, was impervious, struck a deep chord beyond the current battle, forcing several factions to reconsider their own weaknesses and presumptions. Notwithstanding their strength, the mercenaries' loss signaled the start of a protracted and agonizing change. Some of them aimed to create a new identity that prioritized collaboration and innovation over intimidation and brute force. They understood that adaptability was necessary to survive in the new galactic order. In sight, but this change was anything but easy. The old routines and progress were sluggish, and it was tough to dislodge deeply held beliefs. The mercenaries found it difficult to adjust and became representative of the larger difficulties encountered by any force that depends on antiquated ideas in a world that is evolving quickly. In the meantime, the Marine Rangers came to represent resiliency and hope for people who had endured the shadow of the triumph. The triumph of the mercenaries was not only a military triumph, but also an example of the Rangers' triumph over an apparently invincible opponent, demonstrating the strength of unity and purpose, inspiring others to feel that despite tremendous obstacles, change was possible. This effect went beyond the military, strategy influencing how groups viewed conflict resolution, governance, and diplomacy. The collapse of the extraterrestrial mercenaries coerced groups and were not just a defeat for them, but also a moment of reckoning for the galaxy as a whole. It also highlighted the need to face difficult realities about the nature of power and the boundaries of fear-based control. The value of flexibility, self-gratuity, and foresight in negotiating the intricacies of a constantly changing galaxy. Their accomplishments served as a reminder to the Marine Rangers that real strength does not come from dominance, but in the capacity to confront any obstacle with clarity and determination. The alien mercenaries' reputation once decreased, and they became a shell of their former selves in the years that followed. Due to their inability to adjust, their greatest asset was suddenly a problem. Not only cost them their hegemony, but also exposed the weakness of their authority as some of them attempted to reconstruct and change, while others held on to the past because they couldn't face the truth of their circumstances. This dichotomy made sure that they would become a fractured and reduced power in a world where they would never again have the same influence. In contrast to the galaxy that had moved on, the Marine Rangers persisted in development and get ready for any obstacles that may come along. Their triumph over the mercenaries had solidified their position. Throughout galactic history, they had shown themselves to be defenders rather than conquerors. Strength came from a disciplined approach and an unshakable dedication to a higher power, not from fear or brute force. In order to inspire future generations to approach conflict with wisdom and find a solution, this legacy would continue, compared to haughtiness and violence.